The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1879, as Elijah Quinn lowered his smoking revolver and stared at the lifeless body of the man who tried to rob the stagecoach. His eyes, once bright with youthful idealism, now reflected nothing but the harsh reality of the frontier, a reality that had stripped away his faith like wind eroding sandstone. "Another one dead," he muttered, holstering his weapon as the passengers emerged cautiously from the overturned coach. Among them was Josephine Jameson, her honey-blonde hair escaping from beneath her bonnet, blue eyes wide as she surveyed the scene. Unlike the other travelers who cowered in shock, she immediately began checking on the injured, her movements practiced and efficient. "You a nurse, madam?" Elijah asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Doctor's daughter," she replied without looking up. "Picked up a few things." She finished bandaging an elderly man's arm with a strip torn from her petticoat and finally turned toward Elijah. "You saved us, Mr. Quinn, Elijah Quinn." He tipped his hat slightly. "Just doing my job, madam. I'm escorting this coach to Willow Creek." "Josephine Jameson," she offered. "Heading to the same place. My uncle owns the general store there." The surviving outlaws had scattered into the hills, but Elijah knew the danger wasn't over. The stagecoach's axle had broken in the ambush. Night would fall soon, and they were still 15 miles from Willow Creek. "We'll need to make camp," Elijah announced to the 5 passengers. "I'll build a fire. Stay close." As darkness settled over the plains, Josephine helped distribute the meager provisions from the coach. She approached Elijah where he sat apart from the others, his weathered face illuminated by firelight. "You've done this before," she observed, offering him a piece of hardtack. "Too many times." He accepted the food with a nod. "Been riding shotgun for Wells Fargo going on 4 years now. And before that," a shadow passed over his face, "fought in the war, then tried ranching. Neither worked out well." Josephine settled beside him, her skirts arranged carefully around her. "My father was a battlefield surgeon. He came back. Different, war changes a man." Elijah stared into the fire. "Takes things from him he can't get back, like faith?" she asked softly, his head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What makes you say that, the way you handled that body earlier?" No prayer, no words spoken, just dragged him away like furniture. Elijah's jaw tightened. "Outlaws don't deserve prayers." "Everyone deserves prayers, Mr. Quinn. Not from me, they don't." He stood abruptly. "I don't pray, not anymore." Instead of being offended, Josephine's face softened with understanding. "Then I'll do it for you." Before he could respond, she bowed her head and whispered a quiet prayer for the dead man's soul. Elijah watched her with a mixture of resentment and fascination before walking away to check the perimeter of their makeshift camp. The night passed without incident, and at dawn, Elijah fashioned a makeshift repair for the coach axle. It wouldn't hold all the way to Willow Creek, but they could travel slowly for several miles before having to continue on foot. As they prepared to depart, Josephine approached him again. "Thank you for keeping watch all night." "Just doing my job," he repeated, avoiding her gaze. "No, you went beyond duty," she insisted. "You didn't sleep at all." Elijah shrugged. "Sleep and I aren't well acquainted these days." "Another casualty of war." Her perception unsettled him. "You ask a lot of questions, Miss Jameson. I find you interesting, Mr. Quinn." Her frankness caught him off guard. "Most men in these parts either treat me like porcelain or expect me to swoon at their heroics. You do neither." "I'm not most men, clearly." She smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and something long dormant stirred within him. Their journey continued at a painfully slow pace. By midday, the axle repair had failed completely, and they were forced to abandon the coach. Elijah distributed the passengers' essential belongings among them and calculated they had 7 miles remaining to Willow Creek. "We'll walk in pairs," he instructed. "Keep to my pace, no wandering off." He found himself naturally falling into step beside Josephine, who had abandoned her heavier petticoats to make walking easier. Even in her practical travel dress, she moved with a grace that belied the harshness of their circumstances. "You're from back east," he observed as they walked. "Boston," she confirmed. "My mother died last winter. There wasn't much keeping me there afterward. I'm sorry. Thank you." She paused, considering her words. Father wanted me to marry a banker's son, a good match according to society. But not according to you. Henry's idea of adventure was taking a different street home from church. She laughed softly. I wanted more, needed more, so you came west to find it. I came west to find myself, she corrected. Uncle James wrote that Willow Creek is growing. They need educated women to teach to help with medical care. Elijah nodded. Town's building a proper schoolhouse. Been a few incidents with outlaws, but the sheriff's decent. You could do worse than Willow Creek. You know it well. Worked at the Silver Dollar Ranch nearby for a spell before signing on with Wells Fargo. They continued in companionable silence until Josephine stumbled over a hidden rock. Elijah caught her elbow, steadying her. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. Thank you, she said, her voice slightly breathless. Whether from the fall or his touch, he couldn't tell. Watch your step. Terrain gets trickier from here. As afternoon stretched toward evening, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Elijah cursed under his breath. They were still 3 miles from town, and the elderly couple among their party was struggling. We need shelter, Josephine said, voicing his thoughts. Elijah scanned the landscape. There's an old line shack about half a mile east, used it once during Roundup. They diverted their course, reaching the abandoned shack just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The wooden structure was weathered but intact, offering a single room with a rusted stove and rough plank floor. Not exactly the Grand Hotel, Elijah apologized as they crowded inside. It's perfect, Josephine countered, helping the elderly woman to sit on a rickety chair. The storm intensified, wind howling around the cabin's corners. Elijah managed to get a small fire going in the stove with what little dry wood he could find. The passengers huddled around the meager warmth, except for Josephine, who stood by the single window, watching the lightning illuminate the prairie. Never seen a storm like this, she said when Elijah joined her. Territory's famous for them, beautiful and deadly. Like you, he almost added, surprising himself with the thought. I prayed for shelter, she said quietly, and here we are. Elijah's expression hardened. Coincidence. Is it? She turned to face him fully. What happened, Elijah? What took your faith? No one had used his first name in years. It sounded different on her lips, not an accusation, but an invitation. Shiloh happened, he finally said. Watched my younger brother die in my arms, praying for God's mercy the whole time. It never came. Josephine's eyes filled with compassion. I'm sorry. After that came the drought that took my ranch. Then influenza that took my wife. Her hand found his arm, warm even through the fabric of his shirt. So much loss. Too much to believe in a merciful God, he confirmed, his voice low so the others wouldn't hear. I stopped asking for help that never comes. Yet here you are, helping others without hesitation. Elijah had no response to that. They stood in silence, watching the storm rage while something equally powerful stirred between them. Morning brought clear skies and the final leg of their journey to Willow Creek. They arrived before noon, a bedraggled party greeted with relief by the townsfolk who'd feared the worst when the stagecoach failed to arrive on schedule. Josephine's uncle, James Jameson, embraced her tearfully before shaking Elijah's hand with enthusiastic gratitude. You brought my niece safely to me, Mr. Quinn. I'm in your debt. Miss Jameson is quite capable, Elijah replied. Helped save more than one life on the journey. Uncle James beamed. That's our Joey. Come, my dear, let's get you settled. You must be exhausted. Elijah expected that to be the end of it. He reported to the Wells Fargo office, collected his pay, and booked a room at the boarding house for a few days' rest before his next assignment. But Willow Creek was a small town, and their paths crossed again the very next day when he entered the general store for supplies. Josephine was behind the counter, hair neatly braided, wearing a simple blue dress that matched her eyes. Mr. Quinn, she greeted him with a smile. Recovered from our adventure. Just restocking before the next one, he replied, suddenly aware of his unshaven face and dusty clothes. She helped him gather provisions, their hands occasionally brushing as she passed him items. Each contact seemed deliberate on her part, accidental on his, yet he found himself lingering longer than necessary. I'm helping Uncle with inventory this week, she explained as she tallied his purchases. Then I start assisting Dr. Pearson 3 days a week. The school committee meets on Thursday to discuss my teaching position. Sounds like you're settling in quickly. People have been kind. They've already invited me to the Founders' Day dance this Saturday. She glanced up at him. Will you attend, Mr. Quinn? Not much for dancing. He paid for his goods, tipping his hat. Good day, Miss Jameson. He made it halfway to the door before turning back. Your prayer for shelter during the storm. The words felt awkward on his tongue. Thank you for that. Her smile was radiant. You're welcome, Elijah. Over the next few days, Elijah found himself inventing reasons to visit the general store. Coffee he didn't need. A new bandana when his old one was perfectly serviceable. Each time, Josephine greeted him with the same warm smile, engaging him in conversation that gradually extended beyond polite small talk. He learned she was 24, had studied informally with her physician father, and could name every bone in the human body. She discovered he was 32, could track a man across bare rock, and had once dreamed of breeding horses before the war changed everything. When Saturday arrived, Elijah stood in his rented room, staring at his reflection in the spotted mirror. He'd shaved clean, donned his one good shirt, and even polished his boots. The man looking back at him seemed both familiar and strange. The Founders' Day dance was held in the newly completed barn at the edge of town. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over the proceedings. A small band played lively tunes while couples whirled across the floor. Elijah entered hesitantly, nodding to acquaintances but keeping to the shadows. His eyes scanned the crowd until he found Josephine, radiant in a dress the color of summer wheat, laughing as she danced with the young blacksmith's apprentice. Something akin to jealousy flared in his chest, surprising him with its intensity. He was about to leave when she spotted him across the room. Excusing herself from her partner, she made her way directly to where Elijah stood. You came, she said, slightly breathless from dancing. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about. And now that you're here. Her eyes challenged him. Elijah hesitated, then extended his hand. Would you do me the honor, Miss Jameson? I thought you didn't dance, she teased, placing her hand in his. I never said I couldn't, just that I don't. He led her onto the floor as the band struck up a waltz. Elijah's hand settled at her waist, the other clasping hers as they began to move. He hadn't danced since before the war, yet his body remembered the steps as if no time had passed. You've been keeping secrets, Mr. Quinn, Josephine said as he guided her confidently through a turn. You dance beautifully. My mother insisted all her sons learn, said it was a civilized skill. She was right. Josephine moved closer than propriety strictly allowed. What other hidden talents do you possess? The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Elijah felt something shift in that moment, a door opening to a future he'd stopped imagining. I used to whittle, he admitted. Little wooden animals, made them for my brother when we were young. I'd love to see them someday. Haven't made any in years. She looked up at him through her lashes. Perhaps it's time to try again. As the dance ended, Elijah reluctantly released her. May I walk you home? The night air had cooled, and Elijah draped his coat over Josephine's shoulders as they strolled toward her uncle's house behind the store. Stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky, more brilliant than any city dweller could imagine. It's so beautiful here, she said, her face upturned to the heavens. Wild and honest and dangerous, he reminded her. The beauty comes with a price. All worthy things do. She stopped walking to face him. You're leaving soon, aren't you, for your next assignment, Tuesday. He hadn't told anyone yet, but somehow she knew. Escorting a shipment to Cheyenne. Will you come back? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. I haven't had a reason to call any place home for a long time. And now, her eyes held his, unflinching. Now I'm not sure. He took a step closer to her. What are you asking of me, Josephine? Only that you consider possibilities you've closed yourself off to. Like faith. Like everything. Her hand came to rest against his chest over his heart. This is still beating, Elijah, despite everything you've lost. He covered her hand with his own. Because of you, it's beating differently. The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, a question rather than a declaration. But when Josephine responded, her arms winding around his neck, it deepened into something that awakened long-dormant hope within him. "I shouldn't have done that," he said when they finally parted, though he made no move to step away. "I disagree." Her smile was both shy and certain. "In fact, I think you should do it again." This time when they kissed, it felt like coming home. Elijah departed for Cheyenne as scheduled, but not before promising to return within 2 weeks. During his absence, Josephine established herself in Willow Creek, dividing her time between the general store, the doctor's office, and preparing for the school term. She wrote to him daily, letters he collected upon reaching Cheyenne. Each night in his hotel room, he read her words describing the town's happenings, her hopes for the school, and more tentatively, her growing feelings for him. For the first time in years, Elijah wrote back. His penmanship was rough, his sentiments even rougher, but he found himself sharing thoughts he'd never spoken aloud about his brother's death, his failed ranch, his brief marriage to a woman who'd never fully known him. With each letter, something calcified within him began to soften. The return journey to Willow Creek seemed endless, his anticipation growing with each mile. When he finally arrived, dust-covered and weary, Josephine was waiting at the stage depot. She launched herself into his arms without regard for onlookers, and Elijah found he didn't care either. "I missed you," she whispered against his neck. "I thought of you every minute," he confessed, setting her back on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "Uncle James wants you to come for dinner tonight." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Does he now?" "Well," she amended with a laugh, "I told him you were coming for dinner, and he agreed it was a fine idea." That evening marked the beginning of a courtship that scandalized some of Willow Creek's more conservative residents with its intensity, but delighted most with its obvious sincerity. Elijah continued taking short assignments for Wells Fargo, but always returned to Josephine. On a crisp autumn afternoon, they rode out to the Silver Dollar Ranch where Elijah had once worked. The current foreman, an old acquaintance, had mentioned they were selling off a parcel of land 100 acres with a small cabin and good water access. "What do you think?" Elijah asked as they surveyed the property from horseback. "About what?" Josephine seemed genuinely puzzled. "The land." "The cabin would need work, but it's solid. There's room for a garden, maybe some horses eventually." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Elijah Quinn, are you considering putting down roots?" "I'm considering a lot of things." He dismounted, then helped her down from her horse. Taking both her hands in his, he continued, "I never expected to want a home again, or a future, or what?" she prompted when he faltered. "Or love." He drew a deep breath. "I love you, Josephine. I think I have since you prayed for that dead outlaw and showed me what compassion looks like." Tears spilled onto her cheeks. "I love you too, so much it frightens me sometimes." "Then marry me." The words came without planning but with absolute certainty. "Be my wife, help me build something here." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." They were married in Willow Creek's small church 2 weeks later. Josephine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by the local seamstress. Elijah wore a new suit, uncomfortable but determined to give his bride the proper ceremony she deserved. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Elijah kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward at the Silver Dollar Ranch lasted well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the couple who had found each other against all odds. As they prepared to depart for their wedding night at the hotel, Uncle James pulled Elijah aside. "She prays for you every night," the older man said quietly. "Has since the day you brought her here." Elijah nodded, watching his wife bid farewell to the guests. "I know. Do you mind it? Her faith?" "No," Elijah answered truthfully. "It's part of who she is." James studied him closely. "And what about your faith, son?" "Still finding my way back to it," Elijah admitted. "But she makes me want to try." That night, as they lay entwined in the privacy of their room, Josephine rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "What are you thinking?" she asked, tracing patterns on his skin. "That I never thought I'd be happy again." He kissed the top of her head. "That I'm afraid to trust it." She propped herself up to look at him. "Why?" "Because everything I've ever loved has been taken from me." Josephine's expression grew serious. "I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, Elijah, but I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together." "I believe you," he whispered, surprising himself with the realization that he truly did. Winter settled over Wyoming Territory with brutal efficiency. Elijah and Josephine moved into the cabin on their new land just before the first heavy snow. They spent the cold months making improvements, Elijah adding a second room and reinforcing the roof, Josephine creating a home with simple furnishings and touches that reflected her Eastern refinement and his Western practicality. Each night before sleep, Josephine said her prayers. Elijah would listen silently, his arm around her, gradually absorbing her words of gratitude and hope. One evening in early spring, as new grass began to emerge from the thawing ground, Elijah returned from town with supplies and a small wooden box. "What's this?" Josephine asked as he placed it on their table. "Open it." Inside lay a collection of tiny wooden animals: a bear, a wolf, an eagle, and others, each carved with remarkable detail and sanded smooth. "Elijah," she breathed, lifting the eagle to examine it closely. "These are exquisite." "When did you make them?" "During the winter, when you were teaching." He looked almost embarrassed, thought they might be nice for a child's room, someday. Josephine's eyes widened. "Are you saying you want children?" "I'm saying I'm ready for whatever our future holds." He took her hands in his. Family, home, all of it. She flung her arms around his neck, laughing and crying simultaneously. When she finally pulled back, her expression turned serious. "There's something I need to tell you." She guided his hand to rest against her abdomen. "That someday might be sooner than you think." Elijah stared at her in disbelief. "You're with child," she nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Pearson confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby in late autumn." For a moment, he couldn't speak. Overwhelmed by emotions he'd thought himself incapable of feeling again, joy mingled with terror, hope shadowed by the memory of past losses. "Say something," Josephine whispered, her smile faltering. Elijah dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he murmured, "for the baby, for everything." He looked up at her, no longer hiding the tears in his eyes. "For praying when I couldn't, for believing when I'd lost hope." She stroked his hair tenderly. "That's what love does, Elijah. It believes for us when we can't believe for ourselves." That night, as Josephine prepared for bed, Elijah stepped outside onto the porch of their cabin. The vast Wyoming sky stretched above him, stars puncturing the darkness like pinholes in black fabric. He thought of his brother, of his first wife, of all the pain that had led him to this moment. For the first time, he could see how each loss had shaped him, prepared him for the love he'd found with Josephine. Removing his hat, Elijah tilted his face toward the heavens and whispered his first prayer in nearly a decade, not a petition or plea, but a simple expression of gratitude. When he returned inside, Josephine was waiting, her knowing smile suggesting she understood exactly what he'd been doing. "I'll still pray for you," she offered, "until you're ready to do it for yourself." "I know." He took her in his arms, "But tonight I think I managed to start." Their son was born on a clear October morning, healthy, strong-lunged, and with his mother's blue eyes. They named him Daniel James Quinn, after Elijah's brother and Josephine's uncle. As Elijah held his newborn son, gazing down at the tiny face that represented all his hopes and fears, he felt the final pieces of his shattered faith shifting into place. Not the same faith he'd had as a young man, that unquestioning certainty was gone forever. This was something deeper, tempered by suffering yet ultimately stronger. "He's perfect," Josephine said from where she lay, exhausted but radiant. "He is," Elijah agreed, carefully placing the baby in her arms. "Just like his mother." She smiled up at him. "Are you happy, Elijah?" He considered the question, thinking of the journey that had brought him here, from the battlefields of Shiloh to a stagecoach attack, from a man who refused to pray to one who was learning to hope again. "More than happy," he answered, sitting beside her on the bed and wrapping his arm around his family. "I'm at peace." Outside their window, Wyoming's endless prairie stretched toward distant mountains, the land harsh yet beautiful in its honesty. Like the faith he was rediscovering, like the love he'd found with Josephine, complex, challenging, but ultimately worth every struggle. "I love you, Josephine Quinn," he whispered against her hair, "and I love you." She leaned into his embrace, their son cradled between them. "Always and forever." In that moment, Elijah knew with absolute certainty that some prayers were indeed answered not always in ways you expected or when you demanded, but exactly when and how you needed them most. His answered prayer had come in the form of a strong-willed woman who had promised to pray for him when he couldn't pray for himself, and in doing so, had led him back to everything he thought he'd lost forever.